Welcome, seekers of hidden knowledge, to the mystical realm of the occult. Delve into the secrets of the universe as we journey together into the enigmatic world of ancient wisdom. Brought to you by your guide through the shadows of enlightenment, Wisdom Rocker. Uncover the mysteries, unlock the power, and journey with us as we explore the hidden depths within the pages of forgotten scrolls and ancient texts. Prepare to embark on a journey beyond the ordinary, where wisdom transcends time and knowledge is your greatest ally. Welcome to Wisdom Rocker. Prepare to awaken your inner sage. In this video, we will be uncovering the wisdom within the chapters of
The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Manly P. Hall.
The Bembine Table of Isis. A manuscript by Thomas Taylor contains the following remarkable paragraph. Plato was initiated into the greater mysteries at the age of 49. The initiation took place in one of the subterranean halls of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. The Isiaca table formed the altar, before which the divine Plato stood and received that which was always his, but which the ceremony of the mysteries enkindled and brought from its dormant state. With this ascent, after 3 days in the great hall, he was received by the Hierophant of the pyramid. The Hierophant was seen only by those who had passed the 3 days, the 3 degrees, the 3 dimensions, and given verbally the highest esoteric teachings, each accompanied with its appropriate symbol. After a further 3-month sojourn in the halls of the pyramid, the initiate Plato was sent out into the world to do the work of the Great Order, as Pythagoras and Orpheus had been before him. Before the sacking of Rome in 1527, there is no historical mention of the Mensa Isiaca, tablet of Isis. At that time, the tablet came into the possession of a certain locksmith or ironworker, who sold it at an exorbitant price to Cardinal Bembo, a celebrated antiquary, historiographer of the Republic of Venice, and afterwards librarian of St. Mark's. After his death in 1547, the Isiaca tablet was acquired by the House of Mantua, in whose museum it remained until 1630, when troops of Ferdinand II captured the city of Mantua. Several early writers on the subject have assumed that the tablet was demolished by the ignorant soldiery for the silver it contained. The assumption, however, was erroneous. The tablet fell into the hands of Cardinal Pava, who presented it to the Duke of Savoy, who in turn presented it to the King of Sardinia. When the French conquered Italy in 1797, the tablet was carried to Paris. In 1809, Alexandre Lenoir, writing of the Mensa Isiaca, said it was on exhibition at the Bibliothèque Nationale. Upon the establishment of peace between the two countries, it was returned to Italy. In his guide to northern Italy, Carl Baedeker describes the Mensa Isiaca as being in the center of Gallery 2 in the Museum of Antiquities at Turin. A faithful reproduction of the original tablet was made in 1559 by the celebrated Ennius Vicus of Parma, and a copy of the engraving was given by the Chancellor of the Duke of Bavaria to the Museum of Hieroglyphics. Athanasius Kircher describes the tablet as 5 palms long and 4 wide. W. Wynne Westcott says it measures 50 by 30 inches. It was made of bronze and decorated with encaustic or smalt enamel and silver inlay. Fosbroke adds, the figures are cut very shallow, and the contour of most of them is encircled by threads of silver. The bases upon which the figures were seated or reclined, and left blank in the prints, were of silver and are torn away. See Encyclopedia of Antiquities. Those familiar with the fundamental principles of Hermetic philosophy will recognize in the Mensa Isiaca the key to Chaldean, Egyptian, and Greek theology. In his Antiquities, the learned Benedictine, Father Montfaucon, admits his inability to cope with the intricacies of its symbolism. He therefore doubts that the emblems upon the tablet possess any significance worthy of consideration and ridicules Kircher, declaring him to be more obscure than the tablet itself. Laurentius Pignorius reproduced the tablet in connection with a descriptive essay in 1605, but his timidly advanced explanations demonstrated his ignorance concerning the actual interpretation of the figures. In his Oedipus Egyptiacus, published in 1654, Kircher attacked the problem with characteristic avidity, being peculiarly qualified for such a task by years of research in matters pertaining to the secret doctrines of antiquity, and with the assistance of a group of eminent scholars, Kircher accomplished much towards an exposition of the mysteries of the tablet. The master secret, however, eluded even him, as Eliphas Levi has shrewdly noted in his History of Magic. "The learned Jesuit," writes Levi, "divined that it contained the hieroglyphic key to sacred alphabets, though he was unable to develop the explanation. It is divided into 3 equal compartments. Above are the 12 houses of heaven, and below are the corresponding distributions of labor, work periods, throughout the year, while in the middle place are 21 sacred signs, answering to the letters of the alphabet. In the midst of all is a seated figure of the pantomorphic Iyynx, emblem of universal being and corresponding as such to the Hebrew Yod, or to that unique letter from which all the other letters were formed. The Iyynx is encircled by the Ophite triad, answering to the 3 mother letters of the Egyptian and Hebrew alphabets. On the right are the Ebimorphic and Serapian triads. On the left are those of Nephthys and Hecate, representing active and passive, fixed and volatile, fructifying fire and generating water. Each pair of triads, in conjunction with the center, produces a septenary, and a septenary is contained in the center. The 3 septenaries furnish the absolute number of the 3 worlds, as well as the complete number of primitive letters to which a complementary sign is added, like 0 to the 9 numerals. Levi's hint may be construed to mean that the 21 figures in the center section of the table represent the 21 major trumps of the tarot cards. If this be so, is not the 0 card, cause of so much controversy, the nameless crown of the Supreme Mind, the crown being symbolized by the hidden triad in the upper part of the throne in the center of the table? Might not the first emanation of this Supreme Mind be well symbolized by a juggler or magician with the symbols of the 4 lower worlds spread out on a table before him: the rod, the sword, the cup, and the coin? Thus considered, the 0 card belongs nowhere among the others, but is in fact the 4th dimensional point from which they all emanated, and consequently is broken up into the 21 cards, letters, which, when gathered together, produce the 0. The cipher appearing upon this card would substantiate this interpretation, for the cipher, or circle, is emblematic of the superior sphere from which issue the lower worlds, powers, and letters. Westcott carefully collected the all too meagre theories advanced by various authorities, and in 1887 published his now extremely rare volume, which contains the only detailed description of the Isiac tablet published in English since Humphreys translated Montfaucon's worthless description in 1721. After explaining his reticence to reveal that which Levi evidently felt was better left concealed, Westcott sums up his interpretation of the tablet as follows. The diagram of Levi, by which he explains the mystery of the tablet, shows the upper region divided into the 4 seasons of the year, each with 3 signs of the zodiac, and he has added the 4-lettered sacred name, the Tetragrammaton, assigning Jod to Aquarius, that is Canopus, he to Taurus, that is Apis, Vau to Leo, that is Momphtha, and he final to Typhon. Note the cherubic parallel, man, bull, lion, and eagle. The 4th form is found either as scorpion or eagle, depending upon the occult good or evil intention. In the demotic zodiac, the snake replaces the scorpion. The lower region he ascribes to the 12 simple Hebrew letters, associating them with the 4 quarters of the horizon. Compare the Sefer Yetzirah, chapter 5, section 1. The central region he ascribes to the solar powers and the planetary. In the middle we see above the sun marked Ops, and below it is a Solomon's seal, above a cross. A double triangle hexapla, one light and one dark triangle superposed, the whole forming a sort of complex symbol of Venus. To the Ibimorphos he gives the 3 dark planets, Venus, Mercury and Mars, placed around a dark triangle erect, denoting fire. To the Nephthyian triad he gives 3 light planets, Saturn, Luna and Jupiter, around a light inverted triangle which denotes water. There is a necessary connection between water, female power, passive principle, Binah, and Sephirotic mother, and bride, see the Bimathers. Note: the ancient signs for the planets were all composed of a cross, solar disk, and crescent. Venus is a cross below a sun disk. Mercury, a disk with a crescent above and cross below. Saturn is a cross whose lowest point touches the apex of the crescent. Jupiter is a crescent whose lowest point touches the left-hand end of a cross. All these are deep mysteries. Note that Levi in his original plate transposed Serapis and Hecate, but not the Apis Noir and Apis Blanc, perhaps because of the head of Bez being associated by him with Hecate. Note that having referred the 12 simple letters to the lower, the 7 double must correspond to the central region of the planets, and then the great triad AMS. The mother letters representing air, water and fire remain to be pictured, around S the central links, or Yod, by the Opionian triad, the 2 serpents and the Leonine Sphinx. Levi's word ops in the center is the Latin ops, terra, genius of the earth, and the Greek ops, Rhea or Kubele, Cybele, often drawn as a goddess seated in a chariot drawn by lions. She is crowned with turrets and holds a key. See the Isiac tablet. The essay published in French by Alexandre Lenouillet in 1809, while curious and original, contains little real information on the tablet, which the author seeks to prove was an Egyptian calendar or astrological chart. As both Montfaucon and Lenoir, in fact all writers on the subject since 1651, either have based their work upon that of Kircher or have been influenced considerably by him, a careful translation has been made of the latter's original article, 80 pages of 17th century Latin. The double-page plate at the beginning of this chapter is a faithful reproduction made by Kircher from the engraving in the Museum of Hieroglyphics. The small letters and numbers used to designate the figures were added by him to clarify his commentary and will be used for the same purpose in this work. Like nearly all religious and philosophical antiquities, the Bembine Table of Isis has been the subject of much controversy. In a footnote, A.E. Waite, unable to differentiate between the true and the purported nature or origin of the tablet, echoes the sentiments of J.G. Wilkinson, another eminent exotericus. The original table is exceedingly late and is roughly termed a forgery. On the other hand, Eduard Winkelmann, a man of profound learning, defends the genuineness and antiquity of the tablet. A sincere consideration of the Mensa Isiaca discloses one fact of paramount importance, that although whoever fashioned the table was not necessarily an Egyptian, he was an initiate of the highest order, conversant with the most arcane tenets of Hermetic esotericism. Symbolism of the Bembine Table. The following necessarily brief elucidation of the Bembine Table is based upon a digest of the writings of Kircher, supplemented by other information gleaned by the present author from the mystical writings of the Chaldeans, Hebrews, Egyptians, and Greeks. The temples of the Egyptians were so designed that the arrangement of chambers, decorations, and utensils was all of symbolic significance, as shown by the hieroglyphics that covered them. Beside the altar, which usually was in the center of each room, was the cistern of Nile water, which flowed in and out through unseen pipes. Here also were images of the gods in concatenated series, accompanied by magical inscriptions. In these temples, by use of symbols and hieroglyphics, neophytes were instructed in the secrets of the sacerdotal caste. The Tablet of Isis was originally a table or altar, and its emblems were part of the mysteries explained by priests. Tables were dedicated to the various gods and goddesses. In this case, Isis was so honored. The substances from which the tables were made differed according to the relative dignities of the deities. The tables consecrated to Jupiter and Apollo were of gold. Those to Diana, Venus, and Juno were of silver, those to the other superior gods of marble, those to the lesser divinities of wood. Tables were also made of metals corresponding to the planets, governed by the various celestials. As food for the body is spread on a banquet table, so on these sacred altars were spread the symbols, which, when understood, feed the invisible nature of man. In his introduction to the table, Kircher summarizes its symbolism thus: it teaches, in the first place, the whole constitution of the threefold world, archetypal, intellectual, and sensible. The supreme divinity is shown moving from the center to the circumference of a universe made up of both sensible and inanimate things, all of which are animated and agitated by the one supreme power, which they call the Father Mind, and represented by a threefold symbol. Here also are shown three triads from the Supreme One, each manifesting one attribute of the first Trimurti. These triads are called the foundation, or the base of all things. In the table is also set forth the arrangement and distribution of those divine creatures that aid the Father Mind in the control of the universe. Here, in the upper panel, are to be seen the governors of the worlds, each with its fiery, ethereal, and material insignia. Here also, in the lower panel, are the fathers of fountains, whose duty it is to care for and preserve the principles of all things and sustain the inviolable laws of nature. Here are the gods of the spheres, and also those who wander from place to place, laboring with all substances and forms, Zonia and Azonia, grouped together as figures of both sexes, with their faces turned to their superior deity. The Mensa Isiaca, which is divided horizontally into three chambers or panels, may represent the ground plan of the chambers in which the Isiac mysteries were given. The center panel is divided into 7 parts or lesser rooms, and the lower has 2 gates, one at each end. The entire table contains 45 figures of first importance and a number of lesser symbols. The 45 main figures are grouped into 15 triads, of which 4 are in the upper panel, 7 in the central, and 4 in the lower. According to both Kircher and Levi, the triads are divided in the following manner. In the upper section 1, P, S, V, Mendesian triad. 2, X, Z, A, Ammonian triad. 3, B, C, D, Momphtean triad. 4, F, G, H, Omphtean triad. In the center section 1, G, I, K, Isiac triad. 2, L, M, N, Hecatane triad. 3, O, Q, R, Ebimorphous triad. 4, V, S, W, Ophionic triad. 5, X, W, Z, Nephtian triad. 6, Z, E, Tha, Serapean triad. 7, G, D, not shown, E, Osirian triad. In the lower section 1, L, M, N, Horean triad. 2, K, O, S, Pandocean triad. 3, T, F, K, Thostic triad. 4, Peace, F, E, Eluristic triad. Of these 15 triads, Kircher writes, the figures differ from each other in 8 highly important respects, i.e., according to form, position, gesture, act, raiment, headdress, staff, and lastly, according to the hieroglyphics placed around them, whether these be flowers, shrubs, small letters, or animals. These 8 symbolic methods of portraying the secret powers of the figures are subtle reminders of the 8 spiritual senses of cognition by means of which the real self in man may be comprehended. To express this spiritual truth, the Buddhists used the wheel with 8 spokes and raised their consciousness by means of the Noble Eightfold Path. The ornamented border enclosing the 3 main panels of the table contains many symbols consisting of birds, animals, reptiles, human beings, and composite forms. According to one reading of the table, this border represents the 4 elements. The creatures are elemental beings. According to another interpretation, the border represents the archetypal spheres, and in its frieze of composite figures are the patterns of those forms which in various combinations will subsequently manifest themselves in the material world. The 4 flowers at the corners of the table are those which, because their blossoms always face the sun and follow its course across the sky, are sacred emblems of that finer part of man's nature which delights in facing its Creator. According to the secret doctrine of the Chaldeans, the universe is divided into 4 states of being, planes or spheres: archetypal, intellectual, sidereal, and elemental. Each of these reveals the others, the superior controlling the inferior, and the inferior receiving influence from the superior. The archetypal plane was considered synonymous with the intellect of the triune divinity. Within this divine, incorporeal, and eternal sphere are included all the lower manifestations of life, all that is, has been, or ever shall be. Within the cosmic intellect, all things spiritual or material exist as archetypes, or divine thought forms, which is shown in the table by a chain of secret similes. In the middle region of the table appears the all-form-containing personified spiritual essence, the source and substance of all things. From this proceed the lower worlds as 9 emanations in groups of 3, the Ophionic, Ibimorphous, and Nephtian triads. Consider in this connection the analogy of the Kabbalistic Sephiroth, or the 9 spheres issuing from Kether, the crown. The 12 governors of the universe, the Mendesian, Ammonian, Momphtian, and Omphtian triads, vehicles for the distribution of the creative influences, and shown in the upper region of the table are directed in their activities by the divine mind patterns existing in the archetypal sphere. The archetypes are abstract patterns formulated in the divine mind, and by them all the inferior activities are controlled. In the lower region of the table are the father fountains, the Horian, Pandokian, Thostic, and Eluristic triads, keepers of the great gates of the universe. These distribute to the lower worlds the influences descending from the governors shown above. In the theology of the Egyptians, goodness takes precedence, and all things partake of its nature to a higher or lower degree. Goodness is sought by all. It is the prime cause of causes. Goodness is self-diffused, and hence exists in all things, for nothing can produce that which it does not have in itself. The table demonstrates that all is in God, and God is in all, that all is in all, and each is in each. In the intellectual world are invisible spiritual counterparts of the creatures which inhabit the elemental world. Therefore, the lowest exhibits the highest, the corporeal declares the intellectual, and the invisible I, made manifest by its works. For this reason, the Egyptians made images of substances existing in the inferior sensible world to serve as visible exemplars of superior and invisible powers. To the corruptible images they assigned the virtues of the incorruptible divinities, thus demonstrating arcanely that this world is but the shadow of God, the outward picture of the paradise within. All that is in the invisible archetypal sphere is revealed in the sensible corporeal world by the light of nature. The archetypal and creative mind, first through its paternal foundation and afterwards through secondary gods called intelligences, poured out the whole infinity of its powers by continuous exchange from highest to lowest. In their phallic symbolism, the Egyptians used the sperm to represent the spiritual spheres, because each contains all that comes forth from it. The Chaldeans and Egyptians also held that everything which is a result dwells in the cause of itself and turns to that cause as the lotus to the sun. Accordingly, the supreme intellect, through its paternal foundation, first created light, the angelic world. Out of that light were then created the invisible hierarchies of beings, which some call the stars. And out of the stars, the four elements and the sensible world were formed. Thus all are in all, after their respective kinds. All visible bodies or elements are in the invisible stars or spiritual elements, and the stars are likewise in those bodies. The stars are in the angels, and the angels in the stars. The angels are in God, and God is in all. Therefore all are divinely in the divine, angelically in the angels, and corporally in the corporeal world, and vice versa. Just as the seed is the tree folded up, so the world is God unfolded. Proclus says, "Every property of divinity permeates all creation and gives itself to all inferior creatures." One of the manifestations of the supreme mind is the power of reproduction, according to species which it confers upon every creature, of which it is the divine part. Thus souls, heavens, elements, animals, plants, and stones generate themselves, each according to its pattern, but all are dependent upon the one fertilizing principle existing in the supreme mind. The fecundative power, though of itself a unit, manifests differently through the various substances, for in the mineral it contributes to material existence, in the plant it manifests as vitality, and in the animal as sensibility. It imparts motion to the heavenly bodies, thought to the souls of men, intellectuality to the angels, and superessentiality to God. Thus it is seen that all forms are of one substance, and all life of one force, and these are coexistent in the nature of the Supreme One. This doctrine was first expounded by Plato. His disciple Aristotle set it forth in these words: "We say that this sensible world is an image of another. Therefore, since this world is vivid or alive, how much more, then, that other must live? Yonder, therefore, above the stellar virtues, stand other heavens to be attained, like the heavens of this world. Beyond them, because they are of a higher kind, brighter and vaster, nor are they distant from each other like this one, for they are incorporeal. Yonder, too, exists an earth, not of inanimate matter, but vivid with animal life and all natural terrestrial phenomena, like this one, but of other kinds and perfections. There are plants also, and gardens, and flowing water. There are aquatic animals, but of nobler species. Yonder is air and life appropriate to it, all immortal. And although the life there is analogous to ours, yet it is nobler, seeing that it is intellectual, perpetual, and unalterable. For if anyone should object and ask, how in the world above do the plants, etc., above-mentioned find footing, we should answer that they do not have objective existence, for they were produced by the primal author in an absolute condition and without exteriorization. They are therefore in the same case as intellect and soul. They suffer no defect, such as waste and corruption, since the beings yonder are full of energy, strength, and joy, as living in a life sublime, and being the issue of one fount and of one quality, compounded of all like sweet savours, delicate perfumes, harmonious colour and sound, and other perfections. nor do they move violently about, nor intermix, nor corrupt each other, but each perfectly preserves its own essential character. And they are simple and do not multiply, as corporeal beings do. In the midst of the table is a great covered throne with a seated female figure representing Isis, but here called the pantomorphic IYNX. G.R.S. Mead defines the IYNX as a transmitting intelligence. Others have declared it to be a symbol of universal being. Over the head of the goddess the throne is surmounted by a triple crown, and beneath her feet is the house of material substance. The threefold crown is here symbolic of the triune divinity, called by the Egyptians the Supreme Mind, and described in the Sefer HaZohar as being hidden and unrevealed. According to the Hebrew system of Kabbalism, the tree of the Sephiroth was divided into two parts, the upper invisible and the lower visible. The upper consisted of 3 parts and the lower of 7. The 3 uncognizable Sephiroth were called Kether, the crown, Chokmah, wisdom, and Binah, understanding. These are too abstract to permit of comprehension, whereas the lower 7 spheres that came forth from them were within the grasp of human consciousness. The central panel contains 7 triads of figures. These represent the lower Sephiroth, all emanating from the concealed threefold crown over the throne. Kircher writes, "The throne denotes the diffusion of the triform supreme mind along the universal paths of the 3 worlds. Out of these 3 intangible spheres emerges the sensible universe, which Plutarch calls the House of Horns, and the Egyptians the Great Gate of the Gods. The top of the throne is in the midst of diffused, serpent-shaped flames, indicating that the Supreme Mind is filled with light and life, eternal and incorruptible, removed from all material contact. How the Supreme Mind communicated his fire to all creatures is clearly set forth in the symbolism of the table. The divine fire is communicated to lower spheres through the universal power of nature, personified by the world virgin, Isis, here denominated the IYNX, or the polymorphous all-containing universal idea. The word idea is here used in its Platonic sense. Plato believed that there are eternal forms of all possible things which exist without matter, and to these eternal and immaterial forms he gave the name of ideas. In the Platonic sense, ideas were the patterns according to which the deity fashioned the phenomenal or ectypal world. Sir W. Hamilton. Kircher describes the 21 figures in the central panel thus: 7 principal triads, corresponding to 7 superior worlds, are shown in the central section of the table. They all originate from the fiery, invisible archetype, the triple crown of the throne. The first, the Ophionic or IYNX triad, VSW, corresponds to the vital and fiery world, and is the first intellectual world, called by the ancients the Etherium. Zoroaster says of it, "Oh, what rigorous rulers this world has." The second, or Ibimorphous triad, OQR, corresponds to the second intellectual or ethereal world, and is concerned with the principle of humidity. The third, or Nephtian triad, XYZ, corresponds to the third intellectual and ethereal world, and is concerned with fecundity. These are the 3 triads of the ethereal worlds, which correspond to the Father Foundation. Then follow the 4 triads of the sensible, or material, worlds of, which the first 2 correspond to the sidereal worlds, GIK and GDA, namely Osiris and Isis, Sun and Moon, indicated by 2 bulls. They are followed by 2 triads, the Hecatine, LMN, and the Serapeian, ZE, corresponding to the sublunary and subterranean worlds. These complete the 7 worlds of primary genii ruling the natural universe. Psellus quotes Zoroaster. The Egyptians and the Chaldeans taught that there were 7 corporeal worlds, i.e., worlds ruled by the intellectual powers. The first is of pure fire, the second, third, and fourth, ethereal, the fifth, sixth, and seventh, material, the seventh being the one called terrestrial and hater of light, and is located under the moon, comprising within itself the matter called fundus, or foundation. These seven, plus the one invisible crown, constitute the 8 worlds. Plato writes that it is needful for the philosopher to know how the 7 circles beneath the first one are arranged according to the Egyptians. The first triad of fire denotes life, the second, water, over which rule the ibimorphous divinities, and the third, air, ruled by Nephta. From the fire the heavens were created, from the water the earth, and air was the mediator between them. In the Sephira Yetzirah it is said that from the 3 originate the 7, i.e., the height, the depth, the east, the west, the north and the south, and the holy temple in the center sustaining them all. Is not the holy temple in the center the great throne of the many-formed spirit of nature which is shown in the middle of the tablet? What are the 7 triads but the 7 powers that rule over the world? Psellus writes, "The Egyptians worshipped the triad of faith, truth, and love, and the 7 fountains, the sun as ruler, the fountain of matter, then the fountain of the archangels, the fountain of the senses, of judgment, of lightning, of reflections, and of characters of unknown composition. They say that the highest material fountains are those of Apollo, Osiris, and Mercury, the fountains of the centers of the elements. Thus they understood by the sun as ruler the solar world, by the material archangelic, the lunar world, by the fountain of the senses, the world of Saturn, by judgment, Jupiter, by lightning, Mars, by that of the reflections or mirrors, the world of Venus, by the fountain of characters, the world of Mercury. All these are shown by the figures in the center pane of the tablet. The upper panel contains the 12 figures of the zodiac arranged in 4 triads. The center figure in each group represents one of the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac. S is the sign of Aquarius, Z, Taurus, C, Leo, and G, Scorpio. These are called the Fathers. In the secret teachings of the Far East, these 4 figures, the man, the bull, the lion, and the eagle, are called the winged globes, or the 4 Maharajas, who stand upon the corners of creation. The 4 cardinal signs, P, Capricorn, X, Aries, B, Cancer, F, Libra, are called the powers. The 4 common signs, V, Pisces, A, Gemini, E, Virgo, H, Sagittarius, are called the minds of the 4 lords. This explains the meaning of the winged globes of Egypt for the 4 central figures, Aquarius, Taurus, Leo and Scorpio, called by Ezekiel the cherubim, are the globes. The cardinal and common signs on either side are the wings. Therefore the 12 signs of the zodiac may be symbolized by 4 globes, each with 2 wings. The celestial triads are further shown by the Egyptians as a globe, the father, from which issue a serpent, the mind, and wings, the power. These 12 forces are the fabricators of the world, and from them emanate the microcosm, or the mystery of the 12 sacred animals, representing in the universe the 12 parts of the world, and in man the 12 parts of the human body. Anatomically, the 12 figures in the upper panel may well symbolize the 12 convolutions of the brain, and the 12 figures in the lower panel, the 12 zodiacal members and organs of the human body. For man is a creature formed of the 12 sacred animals, with his members and organs under the direct control of the 12 governors or powers resident in the brain. A more profound interpretation is found in the correspondences between the 12 figures in the upper panel and the 12 in the lower. This furnishes a key to one of the most arcane of ancient secrets, the relationship existing between the 2 great zodiacs, the fixed and the movable. The fixed zodiac is described as an immense dodecahedron, its 12 surfaces representing the outermost walls of abstract space. From each surface of this dodecahedron, a great spiritual power, radiating inward, becomes embodied as one of the hierarchies of the movable zodiac, which is a band of circumambulating so-called fixed stars. Within this movable zodiac are posited the various planetary and elemental bodies. The relation of these two zodiacs to the sub-zodiacal spheres has a correlation in the respiratory system of the human body. The great fixed zodiac may be said to represent the atmosphere, the movable zodiac the lungs, and the sub-zodiacal worlds the body. The spiritual atmosphere containing the vivifying energies of the 12 divine powers of the great fixed zodiac is inhaled by the cosmic lungs, the movable zodiac, and distributed by them through the constitution of the 12 holy animals, which are the parts and members of the material universe. The functional cycle is completed when the poisonous effluvia of the lower worlds collected by the movable zodiac are exhaled into the great fixed zodiac, there to be purified by being passed through the divine natures of its 12 eternal hierarchies. The table as a whole is susceptible of many interpretations. If the border of the table with its hieroglyphic figures be accepted as the spiritual source, then the throne in the center represents the physical body within which human nature is enthroned. From this point of view, the entire table becomes emblematic of the auric bodies of man, with the border as the outer extremity or shell of the auric egg. If the throne be accepted as the symbol of the spiritual sphere, the border typifies the elements, and the various panels surrounding the central one become emblematic of the worlds or planes emanating from the one divine source. If the table be considered from a purely physical basis, the throne becomes symbolic of the generative system, and the table reveals the secret processes of embryology as applied to the formation of the material worlds. If a purely physiological and anatomical interpretation be desired, the central throne becomes the heart, the ibimorphous triad the mind, the Nephtheian triad the generative system, and the surrounding hieroglyphics, the various parts and members of the human body. From the evolutionary viewpoint, the central gate becomes the point of both entrance and exit. Here also is set forth the process of initiation, in which the candidate, after passing successfully through the various ordeals, is finally brought into the presence of his own soul, which he alone is capable of unveiling. If cosmogony be the subject of consideration, the central panel represents the spiritual worlds, the upper panel, the intellectual worlds, and the lower panel, the material worlds. The central panel may also symbolize the 9 invisible worlds, and the creature marked T, the physical nature, the footstool of Isis, the spirit of universal life. Considered in the light of alchemy, the central panel contains the metals and the borders, the alchemical processes. The figure seated on the throne is the universal Mercury, the stone of the wise. The flaming canopy of the throne above is the divine sulfur, and the cube of earth beneath is the elemental salt. The 3 triads, or the paternal foundation, in the central panel represent the silent watchers, the 3 invisible parts of the nature of man. The 2 panels on either side are the quaternary, lower nature of man. In the central panel are 21 figures. This number is sacred to the sun, which consists of 3 great powers, each with 7 attributes, and by Kabbalistic reduction 21 becomes 3, or the Great Triad. It will yet be proved that the Table of Isis is directly connected with Egyptian Gnosticism, for in a Gnostic papyrus preserved in the Bodleian Library there is a direct reference to the 12 fathers or paternities, beneath whom are 12 fountains. See Egyptian Magic by SSDD. That the lower panel represents the underworld is further emphasized by the two gates, the Great Gate of the East and the Great Gate of the West. For in the Chaldean theology the sun rises and sets through gates in the underworld, where it wanders during the hours of darkness, as Plato was for 13 years under the instruction of the Magi Paternaith, Ochoaps, Sextnuphis, and Etimon of Sebennythus. His philosophy consequently is permeated with the Chaldean and Egyptian system of triads. The Bembine Table is a diagrammatic exposition of the so-called Platonic philosophy, for in its design is epitomized the entire theory of mystic, cosmogony, and generation. The most valuable guide to the interpretation of this table is the commentaries of Proclus on the theology of Plato. The Chaldean oracles of Zoroaster also contains many allusions to the theogonic principles which are demonstrated by the table. The Theogony of Hesiod contains the most complete account of the Greek cosmogony myth. Orphic cosmogony has left its impress upon the various forms of philosophy and religion, Greek, Egyptian, and Syrian, which it contacted. Chief of the Orphic symbols was the mundane egg, from which fanes sprang into light. Thomas Taylor considers the Orphic egg to be synonymous with the mixture from bound and infinity mentioned by Plato in the Philebus. The egg is furthermore the third intelligible triad, and the proper symbol of the Demiurgus, whose auric body is the egg of the inferior universe. Eusebius, on the authority of Porphyry, declared that the Egyptians acknowledged one intellectual author or creator of the world under the name of Kneph, and that they worshipped him in a statue of human form and dark blue complexion, holding in his hand a girdle and a scepter, wearing on his head a royal plume, and thrusting forth an egg out of his mouth. See an analysis of the Egyptian mythology. While the Bembine Table is rectangular-shaped, it signifies philosophically the Orphic egg of the universe with its contents. In the esoteric doctrines, the supreme individual achievement is the breaking of the Orphic egg, which is equivalent to the return of the spirit to the nirvana, the absolute condition of the Oriental mystics. The New Pantheon by Samuel Boyes contains 3 plates showing various sections of the Bembine Table. The author, however, makes no important contribution to the knowledge of the subject. In the mythology and fables of the ancients explained from history, the Abbé Bagnet devotes a chapter to a consideration of the Mensa Isiaca. After reviewing the conclusions of Montfaucon, Kircher, and Pignorius, he adds, "I am of the opinion that it was a votive table, which some prince or private person had consecrated to Isis, as an acknowledgment for some benefit which he believed she had conferred upon him." The Bembine Table of Isis. Concerning the theurgic or magic sense in which the Egyptian priests exhibited in the Bembine Table of Isis the philosophy of sacrifice, rites and ceremonies by a system of occult symbols, Athanasius Kircher writes, "The early priests believed that a great spiritual power was invoked by correct and unabridged sacrificial ceremonies. If one feature were lacking, the whole was vitiated," says Iamblichus. Hence they were most careful in all details, for they considered it absolutely essential for the entire chain of logical connections to be exactly according to ritual. Certainly for no other reason did they prepare and prescribe for future use the manuals, as it were, for conducting the rites. They learned, too, what the first hieromancers, possessed, as it were, by a divine fury, devised as a system of symbolism for exhibiting their mysteries. These they placed in this tablet of Isis, before the eyes of those admitted to the sanctum sanctorum in order to teach the nature of the gods and the prescribed forms of sacrifice. Since each of the orders of gods had its own peculiar symbols, gestures, costumes, and ornaments. They thought it necessary to observe these in the whole apparatus of worship, as nothing was more efficacious in drawing the benign attention of the deities and genii. Thus, their temples, remote from the usual haunts of men, contained representations of nearly every form in nature. First, in the pavement, they symbolized the physical economy of the world, using minerals, stones, and other things suitable for ornaments, including little streams of water. The walls showed the starry world, and the world of genii. In the center was the altar, to suggest the emanations of the Supreme Mind from its center. Thus, the entire interior constituted a picture of the universe of worlds. The priests, in making sacrifices, wore raiment adorned with figures similar to those attributed to the gods. Their bodies were partially bare like those of the deities, and they themselves were divested of all material cares and practices, the strictest chastity. Their heads were veiled to indicate their charge of earthly things. Their heads and bodies were shaved, for they regarded hair as a useless excrescence. Upon the head, they bore the same insignia as those attributed to the gods. Thus arrayed, they regarded themselves to be transformed into that intelligence with which they constantly desired to be identified. For example, in order to call down to the world the soul and spirit of the universe, they stood before the image shown in the center of our tablet, wearing the same symbols as that figure and its attendants, and offered sacrifices. By these and the accompanying singing of hymns, they believed that they infallibly drew the gods' attention to their prayer. And so they did in regard to other regions of the tablet, believing of necessity the proper ritual properly carried out would evoke the deity desired. That this was the origin of the science of oracles is apparent, as a touched chord produces a harmony of sound. Likewise, the adjoining chords respond, though not touched. Similarly, the idea they expressed by their concurrent acts while adoring the god came into accord with basic idea, and by an intellectual union it was returned to them deiformed, and they thus obtained the idea of ideas. Hence there sprang up in their souls, they thought, the gift of prophecy and divination, and they believed they could foretell future events, impending evils, etc. For as in the Supreme Mind everything is simultaneous and spaceless, the future is therefore present in that mind, and they thought that while the human mind was absorbed in the Supreme by contemplation, by that union they were enabled to know all the future. Nearly all that is represented in our tablet consists of amulets which, by analogy above described, would inspire them, under the described conditions, with the virtues of the supreme power, and enable them to receive good and avert evil. They also believed they could in this magical manner effect cures of diseases. That genii could be induced to appear to them during sleep and cure, or teach them to cure the sick. In this belief they consulted the gods about all sort of doubts and difficulties, while adorned with the simulacra of the mystic rite, and intently contemplating the divine ideas, and while so enraptured they believed the god by some sign, nod or gesture communicated with them, whether asleep or awake, concerning the truth or falsity of the matter in point. See Oedipus Egyptiacus. Levi's Key to the Bembine Table, from Levi's History of Magic. The Isiac tablet, writes Levi, is a key to the ancient Book of Thoth, which has survived to some extent the lapse of centuries and is pictured to us in the still comparatively ancient set of tarocchi cards. To him the Book of Thoth was a résumé of the esoteric learning of the Egyptians. After the decadence of their civilization, this lore became crystallized in a hieroglyphic form as the tarot. This tarot, having become partially or entirely forgotten or misunderstood, its pictured symbols fell into the hands of the sham diviners and of the providers of the public amusement by games of cards. The modem tarot, or tarocchi pack of cards, consists of 78 cards, of which 22 form a special group of trumps, of pictorial design. The remaining 56 are composed of 4 suits of 10 numerals and 4 court cards, king, queen, knight, and knave, or valet. The suits are swords, militarism, cups, sacerdocy, clubs or wands, agriculture, and shekels or coins, commerce, answering respectively to our spades, hearts, clubs, and diamonds. Our purpose is with the 22 trumps. These form the special characteristic of the pack and are the lineal descendants of the hieroglyphics of the tarot. These 22 respond to the letters of the Hebrew and other sacred alphabets, which fall naturally into 3 classes of a trio of mothers, a heptad of doubles, and a duodecad of simple letters. They are also considered as a triad of heptads and one apart, a system of initiation and an uninitiate. See Westcott's The Isiac Tablet. Westcott's Key to the Bembine Table. From Westcott's The Isiac Tablet. Zoroaster declared that the number 3 shines throughout the world. This is revealed in the Bembine Table by a series of triads representing the creative impulses. Of the Isiac Table. Alexandre Lenoir writes, "The Isiac Table, as a work of art, is not of great interest. It is but a composition, rather cold and insignificant, whose figures, summarily sketched and methodically placed near each other, give but little impression of life. But if, on the contrary, after examining it, we understand the purpose of the author, we become soon convinced that the Isiac Table is an image of the heavenly sphere divided in small parts, to be used very like for general teaching. According to that idea, we can conclude that the Isiac Table was originally the introduction to a collection followed by the Mysteries of Isis. It was engraved on copper in order to be used in the ceremonial of initiation. See new essay on the Isiac Table.
Thanks for watching the Wisdom Rocker. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.